What if we told you the unsung heroes of medieval society weren't kings, knights, or even prolific peasants, but someone far more familiar yet utterly overlooked? What if their impact shaped families and fortunes across centuries, from 500 to 1500 CE? Number 5. The first responders of nurturing and care. In a world before childcare centers, and even before the concept of childhood as a distinct developmental stage became widely understood, the smallest members of society faced immense odds. Life expectancy was brutally short, and infant and child mortality rates were staggeringly high. Diseases that are now easily treatable, like measles or influenza, swept through communities with devastating force. Accidents from open hearths to farm tools presented daily threats. Against this backdrop, the constant watchful presence of medieval grandparents emerged as a silent, powerful force for survival. They were the original, dedicated caregivers, often the first to respond to the needs of the youngest, providing essential nurturing that allowed families to function and future generations to simply exist. Consider the typical medieval household, whether a humble peasant cottage or a bustling artisan's home in a growing town. Parents, particularly mothers, were integral to the daily economy of the family unit. A mother's labor in the fields, at the loom, in the kitchen garden, or in the marketplace directly contributed to the family's survival. Her absence from these tasks, even for a short period, could mean the difference between having enough food for the winter or facing starvation. This economic reality meant that new mothers needed to return to their essential work quickly after childbirth. This is where the wisdom and experience of grandmothers, and sometimes grandfathers, became an irreplaceable asset. Grandmothers often took on the primary care of infants and toddlers, freeing the parents to engage in more physically demanding or time-consuming labor. They soothed crying babies, changed swaddling cloths, and prepared basic nourishment. For infants past the nesting stage, grandmothers were often responsible for preparing pap or other soft foods, adapting them to the limited diet available. Their patient hands and familiar voices provided a crucial sense of security for young children in a chaotic and often dangerous environment. Surviving household accounts from noble families sometimes detail payments to wet nurses, but for the vast majority of the population, grandmothers filled this vital gap, offering care that was both loving and economically strategic. The care offered by these elder family members extended far beyond mere feeding and cleaning. They were the constant presence, the watchful eyes that prevented children from wandering into dangerous areas, like open wells or busy roads, or from suffering burns from unguarded fires. A common feature of medieval homes was the open hearth, a source of warmth and cooking, but also a significant hazard for a curious toddler. Grandparents created a safe zone, keeping children away from such dangers. Legal records from some regions occasionally mention cases of children who died in accidents, highlighting the ever-present risks that watchful caregivers worked to mitigate. The presence of an older, less physically active adult allowed for a continuous vigil that younger working parents could not always maintain. During times of illness, which were frequent and often life-threatening for children, grandmothers were often the primary nurses. Lacking formal medical training, they relied on generations of accumulated folk wisdom, observing symptoms, administering herbal remedies passed down through the family, and providing constant comfort. A child struggling with a fever or a cough would often find solace in the grandmother's lap, receiving a warmth and reassurance that transcended any specific cure. Their steady presence and patient ministrations, even without understanding the true nature of disease, often provided the crucial element of care that could tip the balance towards recovery. Manuscripts depicting domestic scenes, though rare, sometimes show an older woman tending to a child, illustrating this everyday reality. The high mortality rates for adults meant that many children were orphaned at a young age. In such tragic circumstances, grandparents frequently stepped in as primary guardians. Legal documents, such as wills and court records concerning property and inheritance, often reveal instances where grandparents were designated as the carers for their grandchildren. This was not merely an act of charity, but a deep-seated familial obligation, ensuring the continuation of the family line and the preservation of any meager property. These grandparents took on the full responsibility of raising children who had lost their parents, providing them not just with a home but with the vital emotional support needed to navigate profound loss. A testament from a 14th century English village might, for example, specify a grandparent as the guardian of a minor child, granting them access to the child's small inheritance until adulthood. Beyond the physical necessities, medieval grandparents offered invaluable emotional security. In a world marked by scarcity, disease, and conflict, the presence of an elder who had seen much and survived it all provided a calming, stable influence. They were the consistent anchors in young lives, offering affection, stories, and a sense of belonging within a larger family narrative. This emotional bond, though difficult to quantify through historical records, is a consistent theme in later folklore and early modern accounts that reflect on older traditions. The comfort of a grandmother's embrace or a grandfather's steady presence would have been a significant source of solace, shaping the psychological well-being of medieval children. Their nurturing role was not just about day-to-day survival, it was also about fostering a sense of identity and connection to the past. Grandparents, with their long memories, passed down family lore, stories of ancestors, and the history of their immediate community. This oral tradition, delivered in comforting tones during quiet moments, instilled in children a strong sense of who they were and where they came from. It wove them into the continuity of their lineage, providing a foundational sense of self in a world that often presented harsh realities. These narratives, often recounted during long winter evenings by the fireside, served as a primary form of cultural transmission, laying the groundwork for a child's understanding of their place in the world. The contributions of medieval grandparents, as first reverts in nurturing and care, were fundamental. Their patient hands, watchful eyes, and steady presence provided the direct everyday support that allowed medieval children to survive infancy and early childhood at all. They were the unsung heroes of daily life, their constant care underpinning the very continuation of families and communities. Without their dedicated, often unnoticed efforts, the chain of generations might have broken far more frequently. Number 4. Architects of intergenerational stability. Life in the Middle Ages was complex, marked by rigid social structures, fierce competition for resources, and the ever-present possibility of internal family strife. Within this intricate web, medieval grandparents often played the role of master architects, designing and maintaining the very framework of intergenerational stability. They were the peacemakers, the mediators, the living repositories of family history and tradition, ensuring that the lineage endured, disputes were resolved, and the delicate balance of power within the household remained intact. Their presence was a powerful force for cohesion, preventing families from fracturing under pressure, and ensuring the smooth passage of property, knowledge, and social standing from one generation to the next. One of their most crucial functions was that of family mediator. Arguments between parents and children were common, especially as younger generations sought independence or questioned established norms. Zebleds often clashed over resources, inheritances, or perceived slights. When such conflicts arose, the elder generation, particularly the grandparents, often stepped in as neutral, respected arbiters. Their long experience, combined with their emotional investment in all parties, gave them a unique authority to calm tensions and find common ground. A 13th century German legal compilation might include clauses addressing family disputes, and while it doesn't explicitly name grandparents as mediators, the customary law often deferred to elder wisdom. Their pronouncements or suggested compromises were frequently accepted, not just out of respect, but because their solutions often prioritized the long-term survival and prosperity of the entire family unit over individual grievances. In an era where literacy was not widespread, particularly among the peasant and artisan classes, the oral transmission of history was paramount. Grandparents held the narratives of their ancestors, the triumphs, the tragedies, the marriages, and the land acquisitions. They could recount who was related to whom, what agreements had been made decades ago, and what precedents existed for current situations. This deep knowledge of family lineage and history was essential for proving claims to land, property, or status. For noble families, elder members often possessed detailed knowledge of alliances, feuds, and marriage strategies, stretching back generations, information vital for maintaining power and influence. Genealogies, painstakingly memorized and passed down, were the backbone of medieval social standing, and grandparents were their primary custodians. The transfer of property and land was another area where grandparents exerted significant influence. In many societies, land was the primary source of wealth and status. Elder parents often retained control over land until their death, or until they chose to retire and formally pass it to their heirs. This meant that while the younger generation might work the land, the ultimate decision-making power regarding its sale, division, or inheritance often rested with the older generation. Wills and land deeds from across Europe consistently show how carefully such transfers were managed, with elder family members often dictating terms that ensured their continued support while alive and the ultimate distribution of assets after their passing. This system, while sometimes a source of tension, ultimately ensured that resources remained within the family, preventing fragmentation and economic decline. A charter from a 12th century monastery detailing land bequests often reveals complex arrangements of familial inheritance overseen by the patriarch or matriarch. Arranging marriages was also a domain where grandparents, especially grandmothers, played a significant role. Marriage was rarely a matter of individual romantic choice in the Middle Ages. It was an economic and social alliance between families. Grandparents, with their extensive knowledge of kinship networks, community reputation, and economic standing, were often instrumental in identifying suitable matches for their grandchildren. They understood the long-term implications of such unions for the family's fortunes, prestige, and security. Their counsel was highly valued, and their endorsement often sealed the agreement. Chronicles describing noble marriages often highlight the counsel given by elder family members, illustrating their powerful influence in these strategic decisions. During times of widespread social upheaval, such as plague epidemics, famine, or local warfare, the presence of grandparents provided an essential element of stability. They represented continuity and resilience. Having lived through previous hardships, they possessed a perspective that younger generations lacked, offering calm, reassurance, practical advice on survival, and a reminder that communities had faced and overcome adversity before. Their experience in managing scarcity or dealing with loss would have been invaluable. When populations were decimated by the Black Death in the mid-14th century, it was often the older, more resilient individuals who remained to pick up the pieces, providing critical leadership and wisdom to the surviving younger generations. Church records sometimes show instances where older individuals, having survived epidemics, took on new roles in community leadership or familial reconstruction. Maintaining family honor and reputation was a collective responsibility, and grandparents were fierce guardians of this intangible but vital asset. A family's standing in the community, its trustworthiness, and its good name were crucial for everything from securing loans to finding marriage partners. Grandparents, having spent a lifetime building and defending this reputation, were quick to correct any behavior that might tarnish it. Their moral authority and deep-seated commitment to the family's legacy made them formidable enforcers of social norms and ethical conduct. Accounts of legal proceedings, though not directly citing grandparents, often hint at the importance of a family's standing in determining outcomes, a standing carefully cultivated over generations. In cases where grandchildren were orphaned, as explored earlier, grandparents not only provided physical care, but also assumed the role of guardians of their future and their inheritance. They ensured that any property or rights belonging to the orphaned child were protected and managed until the child came of age. This role extended to advocating for their grandchildren's interests in legal disputes or challenging unfair claims. Legal documents from medieval courts occasionally contain petitions from grandparents asserting their rights and responsibilities as guardians. The contributions of medieval grandparents as architects of intergenerational stability were profound. They were the indispensable glue that held medieval families together, especially in times of stress. Their wisdom, their memory, and their moral authority were the foundations upon which enduring lineages and stable communities were built. They ensured that the delicate balance of familial relationships and the continuous flow of resources remained intact, allowing the tree of generations to continue its growth. Number 3. Master educators and skill transmitters. In the tapestry of medieval life, formal schooling as we understand it was a luxury reserved for a tiny fraction of the population, primarily boys destined for the church or the burgeoning universities. For the vast majority, education was a practical hands-on affair, learned within the confines of the family unit and the immediate community. In this informal yet incredibly effective system, medieval grandparents emerged as the primary educators and skill transmitters. They were the living libraries of practical knowledge, the patient mentorate who passed down the essential techniques, crafts, and wisdom necessary for survival and prosperity in their specific social and economic context. Their enduring legacy was the continuity of vital skills across generations, the very bedrock of medieval society. Agricultural knowledge was paramount for the vast majority of the population. Grandparents, having spent decades working the land, possessed an encyclopedic understanding of local soils, weather patterns, planting cycles, and animal husbandry. They taught their grandchildren how to identify the best time to sow seeds, how to recognize healthy crops, how to mend a fence, how to care for livestock, and how to maximize yields from a meager plot. This was not theoretical instruction, but a constant hands-on apprenticeship. A 14th century agricultural treatise, like the Crescenzi's Ruralia Commoda, might contain general advice. But the granular, localized knowledge of a grandparent was far more valuable for daily farming life. They demonstrated the proper way to hold a scythe, to milk a cow, to churn butter, or to identify and gather edible wild plants. Beyond agriculture, grandparents were masters of a wide array of household and craft skills. Grandmothers taught girls the intricate processes of spinning raw wool or flax into thread, weaving that thread into cloth, and then sewing garments for the entire family. They knew how to dye fabrics using natural pigments, how to mend torn clothing to extend its life, and how to preserve food through salting, drying, smoking, or pickling to last through the harsh winter months. These were not hobbies, but essential survival skills. Archaeological finds of spindle whorls and weaving combs, common in medieval homesteads, speak to the widespread nature of these domestic crafts, often passed down from elder women to younger ones. Grandfathers often taught their grandsons basic carpentry, how to repair tools, how to fell a tree, or how to maintain a thatched roof. For those in artisanal families, grandparents might have been the first instructors in their specific trade, be it pottery, leatherwork, or blacksmithing. They taught the patience, precision, and dedication required to master a craft, ensuring that valuable techniques were not lost. Guild records, while detailing formal apprenticeships, implicitly point to the foundational skills often acquired at home under the guidance of elders. Crucially, medieval grandparents were often the primary transmitters of herbal medicine and folk remedies. Lacking access to physicians or apothecaries, families relied on centuries of accumulated wisdom regarding medicinal plants. Grandmothers in particular knew which herbs could soothe a cough, reduce a fever, heal a wound, or alleviate pain. They taught their grandchildren how to identify these plants in the local woods or meadows, how to harvest them correctly, and how to prepare them as poultices, infusions, or salves. Medical texts from the period, like the Trotula or various herbals, existed, but the practical, experiential knowledge of the elder family member was the most accessible and often the only source of such critical information. They were the family's first line of defense against illness and injury. The education provided by grandparents extended to essential life skills beyond direct labor. They taught social graces, how to interact with neighbors, how to negotiate in the marketplace, and the unspoken rules of community etiquette. They passed down proverbs, riddles, and moral tales that instilled ethical values and practical wisdom. These stories, often told during long winter evenings by the hearth, were not just entertainment. They were powerful pedagogical tools that taught children about right and wrong, prudence, and the consequences of their actions. Surviving collections of medieval proverbs and fables attest to the widespread use of such narrative forms for instruction. For the rare few who had access to literacy, often in noble or wealthy merchant families, grandparents sometimes played a role in initial instruction. An educated grandmother might teach a young child the alphabet, or how to read from a psalter or a prayer book before a tutor was hired. While not the norm, such instances highlight the elder generation's role in the intellectual development of their grandchildren when opportunities arose. Illuminated manuscripts, often featuring family portraits, occasionally depict older women teaching children, visually representing this form of domestic instruction. The transmission of oral traditions was another profound contribution. Grandparents passed down not just practical skills, but also the rich tapestry of local history, legends, songs, and customs. They were the custodians of cultural memory, ensuring that the unique heritage of their family and community was preserved. This included everything from local superstitions and seasonal rituals to the specific family recipes or techniques for making a particular type of cheese or bread. These traditions fostered a sense of belonging and cultural identity within the younger generation. The contributions of medieval grandparents as master educators and skill transmitters were foundational. They were the primary instructors in a world where formal schooling was rare, ensuring that each new generation possessed the practical knowledge and wisdom necessary to survive and thrive. Through their patience, their experience, and their continuous hands-on mentorship, they ensured the seamless transfer of vital skills, shaping the everyday competence and cultural identity of countless individuals across the Middle Ages. Number 2. Economic backbone and resource guardians. The medieval household was more than just a place to live. It was the fundamental economic unit of society. Every able-bodied person contributed to its survival and prosperity, and the roles within it were often fluid, adapting to circumstances. Within this dynamic system, medieval grandparents frequently served as the unheralded economic backbone and astute guardians of family resources. Their continued labor, accumulated wealth, and wise oversight of assets were crucial elements that allowed families to persist, adapt, and even accumulate a degree of stability across generations. Their presence often represented a significant economic advantage, freeing up younger family members for other vital tasks or providing crucial support during lean times. For the vast majority of the population who lived and worked on the land, grandparents continued to contribute physically as long as their bodies allowed. Even if they could no longer undertake the most strenuous tasks, such as plowing or heavy harvesting, their labor remained valuable. Grandmothers might continue to spin yarn, prepare meals, tend a kitchen garden, or care for smaller livestock. Grandfathers might mend tools, repair fences, or supervise younger workers. Manor rolls, which documented the labor obligations of peasants, often record older family members still contributing their customary days of work or providing specific services, indicating their continued productive capacity well into old age. This ongoing contribution reduced the need for hired labor, which was a significant expense for any medieval household. Beyond direct labor, grandparents played a vital role in managing the household economy. They possessed invaluable experience in resource allocation, knowing how to make the most of scarce provisions, how to preserve food effectively, and how to budget for the long, lean months of winter. They oversaw the family's assets, whether livestock, tools, or stored grain, ensuring nothing was wasted or misused. Their frugality, born of necessity and wisdom, acquired through decades of experience, was a crucial skill for maintaining the family's economic viability. Household accounts from wealthier families, though not common for the peasant class, sometimes reveal the detailed management of supplies and provisions, often overseen by the elder matriarch. Perhaps one of the most significant yet often overlooked economic contributions of grandparents was their role as informal bankers and providers of capital. Over a lifetime, a diligent individual might accumulate a small surplus of coin, a valuable tool, or a small piece of livestock. This accumulated wealth, however modest, often remained in the hands of the elder generation. When a younger family member needed capital to start a trade, acquire a new tool, or contribute to a dowry for a marriage, the grandparents were often the first and only source of such funds. Wills and testaments frequently detail small bequests of money, animals, or household goods, indicating that the elder generation indeed held and distributed tangible assets. These small injections of capital could be the difference between a young family struggling or getting a modest start. The presence of grandparents also served as a critical buffer during times of economic hardship. When crops failed, disease struck, or famine threatened, the multi-generational household provided a crucial safety net. The wisdom and accumulated resources of the elders could help the family weather the storm. They might know where to find alternative food sources, how to stretch meager rations, or where to seek temporary work. Their very presence meant more hands available, even if less robust, to address the crisis. Their experience in surviving past famines or plagues gave them a perspective and practical skills that younger generations lacked, guiding the family through periods of extreme vulnerability. In cases of land tenure and succession, elderly heads of household often retained control of the family land or workshops for many years, even decades. While this could sometimes create tensions with younger generations eager to take over, it also ensured a steady hand at the helm, benefiting from years of experience in managing the family's primary asset. The ultimate decision on land transfer or division often rested with the grandparents, allowing them to make strategic choices that would benefit the family in the long term, rather than simply passing it to the eldest son immediately. Legal documents detailing land transactions, such as feothment or quitclaims, frequently illustrate the patriarchal or matriarchal control over family holdings. Furthermore, the hidden economic value of their domestic labor and childcare was immense. As discussed earlier, grandmothers often took on the primary care of young children, freeing parents for more economically productive work in the fields or workshop. This allowed mothers to return to essential labor quickly after childbirth, maintaining the household's productive capacity. Without this free, dedicated childcare, families would have either faced a reduction in their output or been forced to incur the expense of external caregivers, if such options even existed for their social class. The financial well-being of the family was often tied to the longevity and continued vitality of its elders. Their ability to contribute labor, manage resources, and provide accumulated assets made them indispensable. Their presence allowed for a larger, more stable, and more resilient economic unit, capable of absorbing shocks and planning for the future. The contributions of medieval grandparents as the economic backbone and resource guardians were profound. They were not merely passive recipients of care in their old age. They were active, vital contributors to the family's economic survival and prosperity. Their labor, their wisdom in resource management, and their accumulated assets provided a crucial foundation that allowed medieval families to endure and often flourish in a world of constant economic uncertainty. Number 1. The spiritual and moral compass keepers. In a world where the church was the dominant institution and faith permeated every aspect of daily life, the transmission of spiritual and moral values was paramount. Formal religious instruction was often limited, and while priests offered sacraments and sermons, the day-to-day inculcation of piety, ethics, and virtue largely happened within the family unit. In this intimate setting, medieval grandparents emerged as the indispensable spiritual and moral compass keepers, guiding younger generations through the complexities of faith, right conduct, and the profound meaning of life and death. Their wisdom, their piety, and their long experience served as a constant, living testament to the values that shaped medieval society. Grandparents were often the first teachers of prayer. Young children learned the basic prayers, like the Lord's Prayer or the Hail Mary, at their grandmother's knee. They were taught the importance of daily devotion, the meaning of the cross, and the significance of various religious symbols. This early introduction to faith was not merely rote memorization. It was an immersive experience, intertwining spiritual practice with the rhythms of daily life. Illuminated manuscripts, particularly books of hours, sometimes depict family members praying together, hinting at this intergenerational transfer of religious practice. The simple act of a grandmother making the sign of the cross over a child before sleep instilled a fundamental sense of the sacred. They were the living encyclopedias of Christian lore, sharing stories from the Bible, tales of saints' lives, and parables that illustrated moral lessons. These narratives, often recounted during long evenings by the fire or during periods of rest from labor, brought the abstract tenets of faith to life for young minds. Children learned about charity from the story of Saint Martin, about forgiveness from the prodigal son, and about resilience from the lives of martyrs. These weren't just stories. They were blueprints for ethical behavior and spiritual growth. Collections of medieval exempla, short moral tales used in sermons, reflect the pervasive nature of such storytelling. Grandparents played a vital role in preparing children for religious rites of passage. They would explain the significance of baptism, guide adolescents in their first confession, and prepare them for confirmation. For noble families, they might ensure the children understood the complex rituals associated with feasts and fasts, or how to properly venerate relics. Their personal experience and deep understanding of these sacred practices provided a vital bridge between the formal liturgy of the church and the personal spiritual journey of the individual. Church records sometimes show older individuals acting as godparents, further solidifying their role in the spiritual mentorship of children. Beyond formal religious teaching, grandparents instilled core moral virtues. They taught the importance of honesty, diligence, humility, and obedience. They explained the concept of sin and salvation and the consequences of moral transgressions. They were often the family's primary enforcers of ethical conduct, using their authority and wisdom to guide behavior and resolve minor disputes with a moral framework. Their long lives meant they had witnessed the consequences of both good and bad behavior within their community, making their advice practical and potent. Legal codes and penitentials from the era emphasized a strict moral code, and grandparents were instrumental in transmitting these expectations within the family. During times of immense suffering, such as plague, famine, or warfare, Grandparents provided profound spiritual comfort and perspective. They reminded younger generations of God's providence, the importance of faith in adversity, and the promise of eternal life. Their own experiences of hardship and loss made their counsel particularly poignant and credible. They often led family prayers for the sick and the dying, offering solace and preparing individuals for a good death, a concept highly valued in the medieval world. Records of confraternities and religious guilds, which often included older members, underscore the community's reliance on spiritual guidance during times of crisis. Grandparents also acted as the living custodians of family values and reputation. They ensured that the moral standing of the family within the community was maintained, constantly reinforcing the importance of living a life that reflected well on their lineage. They were the moral compass that helped guide behavior, acting as a powerful deterrent against actions that could bring shame or dishonor. Their long-standing presence in a community meant their personal reputation was often intertwined with the family's, providing extra impetus to uphold high standards. Even at the end of their lives, grandparents continued their spiritual role. Their deathbeds often became focal points for final spiritual instruction and bequests, ensuring their children and grandchildren understood their last wishes regarding their souls and their property. Their final moments were often seen as a final, powerful lesson in faith and submission to divine will. Wills from the period frequently begin with elaborate spiritual preambles, detailing prayers and arrangements for the soul, showing a consistent focus on the spiritual transition of the dying, a concept often imparted by the older generation. The contributions of medieval grandparents, as spiritual and moral compass keepers, were profound. They were the constant, patient guides who shaped the moral and spiritual fabric of individuals and families. Through their teaching, their example, and their unwavering faith, they instilled the values that underpinned medieval society, preparing younger generations not just for life in this world, but for the one beyond. Their legacy was a deeply rooted sense of morality and a profound connection to the spiritual realm that defined the medieval experience.